Sometimes the people who promise to protect us are the very ones who watch us fall and say nothing. It is easy to believe that betrayal comes with blaring warning signs, loud arguments, shattered plates, or sudden, unexplainable distance. But often it arrives quietly. It comes smiling, toasting to your health, and warmly holding your hand. Imagine, for a moment, celebrating your 35th birthday. You are 8 months pregnant, standing with the husband you love by your side, believing your life is a picture of perfect domestic bliss. Then, suddenly, his mistress appears out of nowhere, hurls a cake directly into your face. And everyone in the room, including your husband's closest friends, laughs at your profound humiliation. But as the story goes, they wouldn't be laughing for long. When Jenna discovered she was pregnant after years of grueling fertility treatments and heartbreaking false hopes, it truly felt like the final missing piece of her carefully constructed life was finally falling into place. The journey had not been kind to her body. Though the pregnancy had been anything but easy, plagued with severe, debilitating morning sickness through the entirety of the first trimester and the sudden, scary onset of gestational diabetes in the second, Jenna approached impending motherhood with the exact same determined optimism she brought to absolutely everything else in her life. There were days when the sheer, overwhelming fatigue brought her to her knees in tears, her body aching under the weight of creating new life. But she pushed through the exhaustion, placing a protective hand over her swelling stomach, constantly reminding herself that the fight was entirely worth it. This baby was everything she had ever wanted. By the time her 35th birthday approached, Jenna was heavily into her third trimester, carrying the physical and emotional weight of being 8 months pregnant. Her sister, Lena, a woman known for her fierce loyalty and unstoppable energy, absolutely insisted on throwing her a grand celebration at Giovanni's. It was a highly exclusive, upscale Italian restaurant downtown, renowned for its private dining rooms and impeccable service. Despite Jenna's persistent protests that she was simply too exhausted for a party, that her swollen ankles couldn't handle heels, and that she just wanted a quiet night on the couch, Lena was completely adamant. "You deserve to be celebrated," Lena told her firmly, gripping her shoulders. "Especially now. Let the people who love you show you exactly how much they care." Jenna had hesitated, her intuition whispering that something was slightly off. Lately, she had felt a strange, undefinable tension radiating from Ethan. A distracted, heavy silence had settled over him like a second skin. He was frequently glued to his phone and staring blankly at the television. But Jenna, wanting to keep the peace, told herself it was just the natural stress of impending parenthood weighing on his mind. Eventually she relented, deeply touched by her sister's stubborn insistence and desire to make her feel special. The evening of the highly anticipated party finally arrived. Jenna had spent hours getting ready, eventually slipping into a gorgeous navy blue maternity dress. She had splurged on this specific gown because the elegant cut and soft fabric made her feel genuinely beautiful despite the cumbersome discomfort of late-stage pregnancy. Ethan had been acting incredibly distant over the past few weeks, always blaming late nights at the firm and overwhelming work stress for his absences. But that evening, he seemed miraculously attentive. He gently guided her out the front door, carefully helping her into the passenger seat of the car, and tightly holding her hand as they walked under the glowing awning of the restaurant. His smile was warm, crinkling at the edges of his eyes, but to Jenna's sensitive touch, his grip felt colder than usual. His movements felt almost rehearsed, like an actor playing the role of a doting husband. The private dining room at Giovanni's had been magically transformed into a glittering celebration space. Lena had decked out the room with elegant silver and gold decorations and a beautiful banner reading, "Happy Birthday." Jenna was draped perfectly across the main accent wall. About 30 guests mingled comfortably around the high-top tables. The room was filled with friendly faces, Jenna's colleagues, close neighborhood friends, loving family members, and several of Ethan's affluent friends from his investment banking firm. This particular group of men from Barclay and Walsh was a boisterous, rowdy bunch that had always made Jenna feel slightly uncomfortable with their perpetual, overgrown boys' club mentality. They always laughed a little too loud, drank their expensive scotch a little too fast, and constantly shared crude inside jokes that Jenna was purposely never a part of. Tonight, they seemed even more tightly bonded than usual, huddled in the corner, whispering behind their glasses and shooting poorly concealed glances in her direction. Still, by all outward appearances, it was the absolute perfect celebration. Lena had gone above and beyond, arranging for a magnificent three-tier cake beautifully decorated with intricate fondant flowers that perfectly matched the pastel nursery theme Jenna had so painstakingly chosen for the new baby. As the night progressed and the plates were cleared, Ethan grabbed a silver spoon and clinked it gently against his crystal champagne flute to gather everyone's attention. "I would like to make a toast," he announced, his deep voice carrying easily across the room as the ambient conversations immediately quieted down. He raised his glass toward his wife. "To my beautiful wife, on her special day." Jenna stood proudly beside him, her cheeks blushing a soft pink as the warm attention of the room turned fully to her. Ethan looked deeply into her eyes and continued, "Jenna, you are glowing, darling. I am the luckiest man alive to have you as my wife, and very soon, the mother of our beautiful child." His words were incredibly sweet, poetic, and hitting all the right notes. In fact, they were almost too perfect, sounding exactly like lines memorized from a well-rehearsed speech rather than spontaneous affection. Jenna smiled warmly for the crowd, but deep down, something in her chest fluttered with anxiety. And it was not a kick from the baby. The gathered friends and family happily raised their glasses in unison, offering a chorus of cheers to Jenna. What absolutely no one in that room knew, and what Jenna herself could not have possibly imagined in her wildest nightmares, was that Ethan's touching words were a complete masterpiece of deception. As he stood there speaking eloquently of luck, loyalty, and love, he was hiding a toxic secret that was about to completely explode into the open in the most devastating, public way possible. Lena, beaming with pride, handed Jenna the ornate cake knife. It was a heavy, silver-plated heirloom that had belonged to their late grandmother, adding a touch of sentimental magic to the moment. Ethan smoothly placed his large hand over Jenna's as they positioned the sharp edge of the knife directly over the top tier of the fondant cake. It was a picture-perfect moment, one that Lena eagerly captured on her smartphone camera, ensuring the memory would be preserved forever. Jenna smiled brightly, feeling a sudden, strong flutter of movement from the baby, feeling exactly as if her unborn child was actively participating in the joyful celebration. That was the exact second the heavy oak door of the private dining room swung violently open. The woman who strode confidently into the room was a complete stranger to Jenna. She was undeniably younger, perhaps 28 years old, with thick, glossy dark hair that fell in perfect waves past her bare shoulders. She wore a skin-tight, fitted red dress that left nothing to the imagination and emphasized every curve of her slim, athletic figure. Everything about this woman's posture radiated an aggressive, predatory confidence as she surveyed the decorated room with a look of absolute, cool detachment. The joyful hum of conversation died immediately, replaced by a sudden, suffocating silence that sucked the air out of the room. The woman's expensive high heels clicked sharply and menacingly against the polished hardwood floor as she walked deliberately toward the center of the gathering. Jenna immediately noticed Ethan's hand go completely rigid over hers on the cake knife. When she glanced up at her husband, his face had instantly drained of all color, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. "Do not let me interrupt your precious little family moment," the strange woman said, her voice dripping with venomous sarcasm that echoed off the walls. Jenna looked back and forth from the striking stranger to her pale husband, deep confusion heavily clouding her soft features. "Ethan, who is this?" she asked, her voice innocent and confused. Before Ethan could even attempt to formulate an answer, the woman continued her aggressive approach until she stood directly across the cake table from the married couple. "I am Vanessa," she said directly to Jenna, though her furious, burning eyes remained intensely fixed on Ethan's trembling face. "Ask your wonderful husband exactly who I am." Ethan finally stepped forward, moving clumsily to position his body between the two women. "This is not the place," he said quietly, his voice a pathetic, pleading whisper directed at Vanessa. "Please just leave." Vanessa threw her head back and laughed, a harsh, grating sound completely devoid of any real humor. "Not the place?" she mocked loudly. "Is that what you said when you were tangled up in my bed last night? This isn't the place?" The entire room collectively gasped. The sound of 30 people inhaling in pure shock filled the space. Jenna's free hand instinctively dropped from the knife and moved to tightly cradle her stomach. A deeply primal, protective gesture for her unborn child. "Ethan." Jenna's voice trembled violently now, the edges of her reality beginning to fray. "What is she talking about?" Ethan remained completely frozen like a statue. He offered absolutely no defense. He offered no denial. He did not yell at the woman to leave or tell his wife she was crazy. His total, cowardly silence was all the confirmation Jenna needed. Vanessa's dark eyes finally shifted away from her lover and focused entirely on Jenna, taking in her swollen, pregnant belly with a look of obvious, unfiltered disdain. "He has been promising to leave you for 6 months. Even after he found out about the precious little baby," she said, her red lips curling upward in pure disgust. "He told me it wasn't even his." Jenna physically swayed, feeling as though the solid hardwood floor had just completely disappeared from beneath her feet. 6 months. Their child had been miraculously conceived exactly 8 months ago. That sickening math meant that Ethan had started his illicit affair with this woman shortly after. Learning he was finally going to be a father after years of trying. The devastating timeline clicked into place in Jenna's mind like a cruel cosmic joke. Every single memory of his distant behavior over the last 2 trimesters was suddenly and violently recontextualized. All the mornings she spent violently throwing up in the bathroom alone. The late-night cravings he grumbled about fetching. The meticulous nursery plans he ignored. All the while, he had been somewhere else, laying in bed with her. "Is this true?" Jenna asked, her voice cracking, though she already knew the horrific answer just by looking at Ethan's stricken, pathetic expression. His continued silence screamed so much louder than any words ever could. Vanessa did not even wait for Ethan to attempt a response. In one sudden, swift, and violent motion, she reached her hands forward, grabbed the entire top tier of the heavy fondant cake, and hurled it with all her strength directly at Jenna. The massive chunk of cake hit Jenna square in the chest with brutal force. There was a sickening, heavy splat, immediately followed by another collective, horrified intake of breath from the entire room. Thick buttercream frosting splattered violently right across Jenna's face, getting tangled in her eyelashes and hair, and completely ruining the beautiful navy blue maternity dress she had so carefully chosen for this night. Heavy pieces of sponge cake and icing slid wetly down the curve of her pregnant belly, leaving thick, greasy trails of buttercream in their wake. It dripped down her body so slowly, almost as if time itself had magically fractured. Sweetened, sticky shards of absolute humiliation were sliding down her trembling body, right in front of every single person she knew and loved. "Now you look exactly as pathetic as you actually are," Vanessa spat, her eyes wild with vindictive triumph. Her voice, laced heavily with toxic venom, echoed painfully in the stunned, absolute silence of the dining room. For 3 excruciating, eternal seconds, the room was utterly, completely silent. Jenna stood frozen and motionless, heavy clumps of cake dripping from her styled hair and falling from her eyelashes. The utter, paralyzing humiliation of the public moment was somehow surpassing even the profound heartbreak and shock of learning about her husband's infidelity. It wasn't just the betrayal of the affair that shattered her soul into a million pieces. It was the incredibly public, degrading spectacle of it. It was the cruel, absurd theater completely unfolding around her swollen, vulnerable belly. And then, from the dimly lit corner table where the group of Ethan's wealthy work friends sat huddled together, a distinct snicker abruptly broke the silence. That single, cruel snicker quickly turned into a dark chuckle, which instantly seemed to give permission for the others at the table to join in. Within moments, several of the guests from the firm were audibly laughing. Some were laughing from genuine, malicious amusement at the dramatic spectacle, while others laughed nervously from the deeply uncomfortable, suffocating tension of the situation. But regardless of the reason, the laughter did not just sting Jenna's pride. It violently cracked something deep inside her spirit. It was a cruel, ringing reminder of just how incredibly alone she truly was in that crowded room. Jenna slowly looked around the room through her cake-smeared, burning eyes, taking in the blurred, laughing faces of the men her husband called his brothers. Then she slowly turned her gaze back to Ethan, silently, desperately pleading for him to do something. To say something. To step in front of her. To defend her honor. Her tear-filled gaze begged for just a single shred of human dignity from the man who had once stood at an altar and promised to protect her from the world. She needed him to do anything at all. But Ethan remained entirely paralyzed, trapped in the space between his devastated wife and his furious mistress, saying absolutely nothing, doing absolutely nothing. In that moment, his sheer cowardice stood much taller than any excuse he could ever possibly offer. Only Lena broke the frozen tableau. She rushed frantically to her sister's aid, violently grabbing stacks of cloth napkins from a nearby table and hurrying to Jenna's side while glaring murderous daggers at the laughing guests in the corner. "What the hell is wrong with all of you?" Lena shouted at the top of her lungs, her booming voice cutting through the cruel laughter like a knife. Her absolute fury vibrated visibly through the entire room, her body trembling with a mixture of fierce sisterly loyalty and profound disgust. The catastrophic events that immediately followed would occur in a terrible, uncontrollable cascade, with each passing moment becoming more shocking and terrifying than the last. As Lena frantically attempted to wipe the heavy clumps of cake and frosting from her sister's pale face, Jenna suddenly let out a sharp, terrifying gasp, her body violently doubling over in blinding pain. "Something is wrong," she whispered breathlessly, her fingers desperately clutching the bottom of her stomach. "The baby." The laughter from the corner table died instantly, sucked out of the room in a vacuum of sudden terror. What had just moments ago been cruel mockery twisted rapidly into genuine dread. Jenna's face contorted in sheer agony as a dark, terrifying, wet stain rapidly appeared on the skirt of her dress, spreading quickly beneath the smears of white cake. Her water had just broken, completely unprompted, nearly a full month before her actual due date. "Somebody call an ambulance," Lena screamed at the top of her lungs, wrapping her arms tightly around her sister to support her full weight as Jenna's knees completely buckled beneath her. The remaining guests scrambled in pure panic, pulling out their phones and dialing emergency services. Ethan, seemingly finally snapping out of his pathetic trance, moved quickly toward his collapsing wife. "Honey, oh my God, I am so sorry," he began, his hands reaching out to grab her arms. Jenna's pain-filled eyes suddenly flashed with a brilliant, blinding fury that stopped him dead mid-sentence. "Do not touch me," she hissed through tightly gritted teeth, her voice sounding like a feral animal protecting its young. By the entrance door, Vanessa's haughty expression had drastically shifted from vindictive, arrogant satisfaction to pure, unadulterated horror as she watched the severe medical emergency rapidly unfold in front of her. This was a dire, life-threatening consequence she clearly had not anticipated when she decided to crash the party. Without saying another single word, she slowly backed out of the room, turned on her designer heels, and completely disappeared into the night, fleeing the scene of her own destruction. Within minutes, the wailing sirens of paramedics arrived outside the restaurant. They rushed into the dining room, loaded Jenna quickly onto a mobile stretcher, and rushed her straight to the emergency department at St. Thomas Medical Center. As they lifted her securely into the back of the flashing ambulance, she fought through the blinding pain to lock her tear-filled eyes with Lena's. "Do not leave me," she whispered, her voice incredibly small and terrified. "I won't," Lena promised fiercely, jumping into the back of the ambulance and tightly clutching her sister's trembling hand. "Not ever." Upon arriving at the chaotic hospital, the attending emergency doctors immediately recognized the extreme seriousness of the medical situation. Jenna was experiencing rapid preterm labor, but it was severely complicated by terrifying signs of placental abruption. This is an incredibly dangerous, potentially fatal condition where the placenta prematurely detaches from the uterine wall long before the baby is ready for delivery, cutting off the infant's oxygen supply and causing massive internal bleeding for the mother. The severe emotional shock and extreme physical stress of the brutal public humiliation had undoubtedly triggered the deadly complication. Out in the sterile, brightly lit waiting room, an excruciating, tense drama was actively playing out among the shell-shocked family members who had quickly followed the ambulance to the hospital. Ethan paced anxiously back and forth across the linoleum floor, his once handsome, perfectly groomed face now deeply haggard, pale, and twisted with an unbearable mixture of worry and absolute guilt. Jenna's parents, who had arrived shortly after, sat huddled tightly together on a vinyl sofa. Her mother was crying quietly into a tissue, while her father, Thomas, stared stonily straight ahead at the wall, aggressively refusing to even acknowledge his cheating son-in-law's physical presence in the room. Lena stood completely apart from all of them, leaning against the wall and furiously typing away on the screen of her smartphone. When Ethan finally worked up the nerve to approach her, looking for any shred of comfort or information, she slowly looked up at him with such intense, unfiltered venom in her eyes that he physically recoiled backward. "What are you doing?" he asked nervously, his voice shaking as he nodded down at her glowing phone screen. Lena coldly turned the phone screen around to face him. Playing clearly on the display was a high-definition video. It was the footage she had been happily recording during the birthday toast and the cake cutting. The perfectly framed video clearly and undeniably showed Vanessa's dramatic entrance. Her loud and furious accusations, the violent cake throwing, and most damning and sickening of all, the cruel laughter from the co-workers that followed, all while perfectly capturing Ethan's complete, cowardly failure to step in and defend his pregnant, humiliated wife. "I was recording what I thought was going to be a sweet, memorable birthday memory," Lena said, her voice dropping incredibly low and sounding incredibly dangerous. "Instead, I perfectly captured exactly who you really are, exactly who your disgusting friends are, and exactly who that crazy woman is." Ethan's face paled even further, taking on the color of ash. "Lena, please. You can't." "I've already sent the video directly to Jenna's lawyer." Lena cut him off sharply, her eyes boring holes into his skull. "And I swear to God, if anything bad happens to my sister or that innocent baby tonight, I am sending this footage to every single person you know, every client, every boss, every family member." Before Ethan could even attempt to formulate a pathetic response, a surgeon wearing blue scrubs pushed through the double doors and entered the waiting room. Everyone instantly jumped up and turned toward him. The intense, brewing family conflict was momentarily completely suspended by their overwhelming, collective concern for Jenna and her unborn child. "The severe stress of the evening has caused major complications," the doctor explained soberly, looking directly at Jenna's parents. "We're doing absolutely everything we can in there, but both the mother and the baby are currently in extreme distress. The baby's heart rate is dropping. We are prepping Jenna right now for a completely emergency C-section." Jenna's mother let out a loud gasp and sobbed audibly, burying her face in her husband's chest. Her father, Thomas, finally turned his head and spoke, addressing Ethan directly for the very first time that night. "If anything happens to either of them in that room, you will answer personally to me," Thomas said. His deep voice trembled slightly, not with any trace of emotional weakness, but with the intensely tightly coiled, explosive rage of a father holding back years of trust and disappointment, now concentrated entirely into one terrifying, violent moment. As the doctor turned quickly to run back to the operating theater to save Jenna, Lena turned to Ethan one final time, stepping directly into his personal space. "This is completely on you," she said, poking a hard finger into his chest. "All of it." There was no loud yelling, no wild dramatics, just a calm, cold, lethal certainty in her voice that terrified Ethan more than if she had screamed. Behind the heavy, swinging doors of the restricted operating room, Jenna lay wide awake, conscious but heavily sedated on the cold, sterile surgical table as a team of frantic doctors worked urgently to deliver her baby. The blindingly bright surgical lights overhead seemed to pulse violently in direct rhythm with the sharp waves of pain radiating through her lower body. She could feel the freezing cold of the steel table beneath her spine, the tight, pinching grip of the multiple furlines taped to her arms, and a deep, gnawing, primal fear that constantly clawed at the fading edges of her consciousness. Her blood pressure is dropping rapidly. The assisting nurse called out in a panic over the hum of the machinery. "We need to move much faster." The lead surgeon immediately responded, his hands moving with blurred precision. "The baby is showing severe signs of distress. We need her out now." The terrifying clinical words cut sharply through the cold air like the scalpels they were holding, sharp, precise, and completely irreversible. Through the heavy, confusing haze of the strong pain medication and her physical agony, Jenna could clearly hear the frantic urgency in their professional voices. A logical part of her brain registered that she should be absolutely terrified right now. But instead, she felt strangely, peacefully detached, exactly as if her spirit was floating above the table, watching the tragic events unfold from a safe distance. The profound, stinging humiliation of the ruined birthday party, the sticky cake, the laughter, the mistress, it all suddenly seemed like a fuzzy, distant nightmare compared to the very real, immediate possibility of actually losing her child. She genuinely didn't care about the cake anymore. She didn't care about the nasty whispers or the mocking laughter or Ethan's betrayal. She only cared about that tiny heartbeat, her beautiful baby, and whether that little heart would manage to keep beating. "Stay with us, Jenna," the anesthesiologist encouraged loudly from up near her head, noticing her eyes rolling back and her fading awareness. "Your baby desperately needs you to be strong right now. Fight for her." Those specific, powerful words pierced straight through Jenna's heavy mental fog like a beacon of bright light. "My baby needs me." The simple, profound thought immediately became her absolute anchor as the skilled medical team worked feverishly to save them both. She mentally clenched onto that singular thought like a desperate lifeline as the heart monitors beeped frantically and the medical machines hummed constantly. Her physical body was going completely numb, but her inner spirit was screaming with a mother's fierce will to survive. Out in the sterile waiting room, the suffocating tension had become completely unbearable. 2 agonizingly long hours had passed by with absolutely no update from the surgical team. Each slow tick of the wall clock felt like an entire lifetime spent in torturous limbo. Ethan sat completely alone in a dark corner of the room, repeatedly calling Vanessa's cell phone, which was ringing endlessly and going straight to voicemail. She wasn't answering him, leaving him entirely abandoned in the mess they had created together. Meanwhile, Jenna's tight-knit family huddled closely together on the exact opposite side of the large room, treating Ethan like a diseased pariah. Ethan had truly never looked physically smaller in his entire life. The expensive, tailored designer suit that once fit his body like a proud armor of success now sagged heavily with the immense weight of his absolute shame. Lena had stepped out briefly into the hallway to speak privately with Jenna's closest friend from college, Monica, who had just arrived frantically at the hospital after seeing Lena's frantic text messages detailing the news. "Is it actually true?" Monica asked, rushing up to Lena, her eyes wide with total disbelief and horror. "Ethan has actually been cheating on her." Lena nodded grimly, her face exhausted. "For at least 6 months, apparently. And the psycho woman actually showed up and threw the birthday cake right at Jenna's face while she's standing there 8 months pregnant." Monica's jaw instantly clenched tight, and her hands balled tightly into white-knuckled fists at her sides. "I recorded the entire disgusting thing," Lena confirmed quietly, pulling out her phone and showing Monica a short, clear clip from the high-definition video. "Look." His pathetic work friends from the firm were actually laughing at her, and Ethan just stood there, He stood there like a damn statue. Lena didn't even have to add out loud what everyone watching the video was instantly thinking. He completely let it happen. Monica watched the video play out on the small screen, placing a trembling hand over her open mouth. "This is absolutely monstrous," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "How is Jenna physically holding up right now?" Lena's tough, resilient composure finally began to crack, the stress of the night breaking down her walls. "We don't know yet. They rushed her in to do an emergency C-section. The doctor said there was some kind of severe complication with the placenta detaching." Her voice broke completely mid-sentence, and her shoulders shook violently under the heavy, crushing weight of holding in too many terrified tears. Monica immediately reached out and pulled Lena into a fierce, comforting hug. "Jenna is the strongest, most resilient person I have ever known in my life," Monica said firmly, rubbing Lena's back. "She is going to fight, and she will get through this." But even as she confidently said the words, Monica's worried eyes flicked nervously toward the heavy, closed operating room doors down the hall, silently willing them to open and bring good news. As the two women stood embracing in the hallway, the lead surgeon, still dressed in his blood-spattered blue scrubs, finally pushed through the doors and entered the main waiting room. Everyone in the room immediately jumped to their feet and fell completely silent, turning toward him with pale expressions ranging from desperate hope to paralyzing dread. The experienced surgeon's exhausted face gave absolutely nothing away as he reached up and slowly pulled down his surgical mask. "The baby has been successfully delivered," he finally announced, his voice steady. "You have a little girl. She is 5 pounds and 3 ounces. A massive, collective exhale of profound relief instantly filled the tense room. Ethan immediately stood up from his dark corner, taking a tentative step forward. "And Jenna?" he asked, his voice shaking with fear. "How is my wife?" The surgeon's calm expression tightened slightly, and he looked directly at Ethan. "Your wife experienced massive, incredibly significant hemorrhaging during the surgical procedure due to the abruption. We have finally managed to stabilize her vitals. But I need you to understand she has lost a massive amount of blood and currently remains in extremely critical condition. The next 24 hours are going to be absolutely crucial for her survival." Jenna's mother let out a wail and collapsed completely against her husband. Thomas, holding his sobbing wife, addressed the surgeon directly. "The baby, doctor. Is my granddaughter okay?" "She is quite premature and is currently experiencing some moderate respiratory difficulties, which is completely common and expected for an infant born at 34 weeks, the doctor explained patiently. "She has been immediately taken up to the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU, for specialized oxygen support and round-the-clock monitoring." "Can we please go see them?" Lena asked, stepping forward and wiping her eyes. "You can see the baby, yes, though the NICU has strict rules allowing only 2 visitors at the bedside at a time," the surgeon instructed. "As for Jenna, she is currently in the recovery ward and is heavily, medically sedated to help her body heal. Only one person will be allowed to sit with her once she is safely moved to the intensive care unit, which should happen within the next hour." As the surgeon turned and left to check on his other patients, Jenna's parents immediately and firmly declared their absolute intention to go up and see their new granddaughter first. Ethan quickly moved forward, intending to follow right behind them to the elevators. But Jenna's father smoothly stepped sideways, physically blocking his path with a broad shoulder. "You have done more than enough to this family for one night," Thomas said coldly, his voice vibrating with warning. "You stay the hell away from my daughter, and you stay away from my granddaughter." Ethan, still in a deep, paralyzing state of shock from the catastrophic evening's events, didn't even attempt to argue with the older man. Defeated and broken, he slowly sank back into his uncomfortable plastic chair. As Jenna's anxious parents followed a kind nurse down the long corridor toward the NICU, Lena slowly approached Ethan's corner. Her earlier explosive fury was now heavily tempered by sheer, bone-deep exhaustion. "Why?" she asked him simply, looking down at his bowed head. "Why on earth would you ever do something like this to her?" Ethan stared blankly down at the scuffed linoleum floor, completely unable to lift his head and meet her piercing gaze. "I swear, I never meant for any of this to happen," he mumbled pathetically. "That is not an answer," Ethan Lena pressed, crossing her arms. "Jenna has been absolutely nothing but a loving, devoted, and supportive wife to you for years. She went through hell trying to get pregnant for you. She was so incredibly excited about having this baby. Your baby," she added, her voice turning sharp and accusatory. Ethan ran his trembling hands aggressively through his perfectly styled hair in extreme frustration. "It just happened, Lena. Vanessa was a new hire at the firm. We started working late hours together on a massive merger. Jenna was just. She was so completely focused on the difficult pregnancy, always talking about the baby, making endless nursery plans, complaining about feeling sick. I just felt. So let me get this completely straight," Lena cut in smoothly, her voice absolutely dripping with vile contempt. "While my sister was physically suffering, vomiting every morning, taking painful hormone shots, and preparing her body to bring your actual child into the world, you were actively sleeping with a junior colleague because you felt a little bit neglected? And to make it all work in your twisted head, you actually told this random woman that the baby wasn't even yours?" "You could say that." Ethan hung his head. He had absolutely no valid response. The sheer, terrifying magnitude of his ultimate betrayal laid entirely bare in Lena's succinct, brutal summary seemed to finally physically hit him in the chest. It wasn't just simple guilt that slowly crept into his pale face now. It was the dawning, absolute horror of truly knowing he had arrogantly crossed a permanent line that he could never, ever uncross. "I need to find a way to make this right," he said weakly, sounding like a lost child. "You can't," Lena said flatly, delivering the absolute truth. Her voice held absolutely no pity, only cold, hard steel. "Some things in this life simply cannot be fixed with a bouquet of flowers and a pathetic apology. The absolute best thing you can do for her right now is to pack up and leave. Jenna does not need the severe emotional stress of seeing your lying face when she finally wakes up from surgery. She is still my wife." Ethan protested weakly, a tiny flare of defiance in his voice. "That baby upstairs is my daughter. You really should have remembered those exact facts before you started sleeping with Vanessa," Lena replied, completely unfazed by his weak posturing. "You should have remembered that before you stood there like a coward while she physically assaulted your pregnant wife. You should have remembered before you and your disgusting frat boy friends laughed while Jenna literally collapsed in agony." Each sharp word hit Ethan in the face like a physical slap. They hurt not just because they were factually true, but because he fully realized he had done absolutely nothing to stop the disaster. Ethan flinched visibly at each accurate accusation. "I didn't laugh," he mumbled defensively. But even as he said the weak words, the vivid image of himself standing frozen, doing absolutely nothing while Jenna bled onto the floor, replayed endlessly on a sickening loop in his mind. "No, you didn't laugh. You just stood there and did absolutely nothing," Lena agreed. "Which, in my book, makes you so much worse." Her voice never rose to a shout. It simply didn't have to. The absolute, unvarnished truth was heavy enough to crush him. Lena quickly checked her smartphone, which had been continuously, aggressively buzzing in her pocket for the last 20 minutes. "I am going upstairs to check on my sister. But before I go, you should probably know that the video of the party is already circulating online. Monica happens to have very close professional connections at several major news outlets, and apparently, they are highly interested in running the sensational story of a wealthy investment banker whose crazy mistress attacked his pregnant wife at her own birthday party, triggering a premature labor." Ethan's head violently snapped up, his neck cracking. The sheer, absolute panic in his widened eyes flared brightly before he could even attempt to hide it. "What? You cannot release that video to the press, Lena. Are you insane? It could completely ruin my career." Lena's resulting laugh was completely without humor. It was a sharp, bitter, echoing sound, the kind of laugh that did not come from any sort of amusement, but from profound, sickening disbelief. "Your precious career?" she asked, shaking her head. "My sister almost died on an operating table tonight. Your newborn daughter is upstairs actively fighting for her tiny breaths in an incubator in the NICU. And you are sitting here worried about your damn job at the bank." She took a slow, deliberate step much closer to him, lowering her voice to a cold, terrifying whisper. "Everything you have ever truly cared about is rapidly slipping right through your greedy fingers tonight, Ethan, and you still don't even get it." Without waiting for his inevitable, pathetic response, Lena turned her back and walked away down the hall, leaving Ethan sitting completely alone to watch the catastrophic consequences of his own selfish actions rapidly begin to unfold around him. The hospital hallway suddenly felt incredibly colder now. The constant, vibrating buzz of his phone in his pocket felt much louder, and the absolute silence of his own massive moral failure was completely deafening. Upstairs, the intensive care unit was eerily, oppressively quiet, the silence broken only by the steady, rhythmic, electronic beeping of vital monitors. Jenna lay completely unconscious on the specialized bed, her skin looking almost as translucent and white as the crisp hospital sheets beneath her. Multiple 4 lines ran vital fluids, antibiotics, and blood transfusions directly into her bruised arms. Lena sat vigilantly in a chair beside the bed, tenderly holding her sister's limp, cold hand, while rapidly scrolling through social media on her phone with her free hand. Lena's threat to Ethan had not been a bluff. The video had indeed gone incredibly viral, and the vast, anonymous internet was showing absolutely no mercy to the guilty parties. In just 3 short hours since the party ended, the high-definition footage had been actively shared hundreds of thousands of times across multiple major social media platforms. Massive online news sites and gossip blogs were already picking up the unbelievable story, blasting it onto their front pages with glaring, clickbait headlines like, "Banker's vicious mistress attacks pregnant wife, triggers emergency birth," and "Birthday cake assault leads to tragic medical crisis while coward husband stands by." Ethan's prestigious investment firm, Barkley & Walsh, was actively being tagged in thousands of furious posts by outraged strangers, with people loudly and aggressively demanding to know whether the company officially condoned such horrific, misogynistic behavior from their senior employees. The firm's usually highly polished, impenetrable PR image was actively crumbling by the minute under the massive weight of unprecedented public outrage. Furthermore, Vanessa's full identity had been incredibly quickly uncovered by dedicated, angry internet sleuths, who easily recognized her face from the staff directory on the firm's official website. Her personal social media accounts were rapidly being flooded with thousands of outraged, hateful comments. People were maliciously screenshotting her professional LinkedIn page and actively resharing her old, hypocritical Instagram captions about female empowerment, confidence, and integrity with brutal, biting sarcasm. Lena sat in the quiet hospital room and felt a grim, dark satisfaction at the incredibly swift, ruthless public response. She didn't feel happy because it would magically fix Jenna's broken heart, but because for once in this unfair world, swift justice did not decide to wait. While Lena hadn't personally hit send to email the video directly to the news outlets, she had certainly not stopped Monica from doing exactly that. Jenna was going to need absolutely all the public and emotional support she could possibly get in the incredibly difficult coming days. And the powerful court of public opinion was planting itself firmly and aggressively on her side. A soft, painful moan from the bed finally drew Lena's divided attention back to her sister. Jenna's pale eyelids fluttered rapidly for a moment, fighting against the heavy sedatives, and then slowly, groggily peeled open. "Lena," her voice was raspy and barely audible over the hum of the room. "I am right here," Lena assured her immediately, quickly tossing her phone onto the side table and leaning closely over the bed. "You are okay. You are safe. You are in the hospital." Jenna's weak hand immediately moved down to gently touch her stomach, which was now conspicuously, terrifyingly flat beneath the thin hospital sheet. Pure, unfiltered panic instantly flashed in her blurry eyes. "The baby," she whispered urgently, her heart monitor beginning to beat faster. "She is safely in the NICU right now," Lena said in a calm, soothing, steady voice, wanting to prevent a panic attack. "She is 5 pounds and 3 ounces of perfection. Mom and Dad are sitting right up there with her right now. She needs a little bit of help breathing right now, because she was early. But the doctors assure us she is incredibly strong. She is fighting." A massive wave of profound, physical relief visibly washed over Jenna's pale face. But it was followed incredibly quickly by the dark, heavy return of full awareness. The memories of the catastrophic events that had violently led to her emergency hospitalization came rushing back into her mind. Hot tears rapidly filled her eyes and spilled over her lashes. "It wasn't a nightmare, was it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Ethan, the cake, Vanessa. They were real. It actually happened." Lena gently squeezed her sister's hand, her own eyes tearing up. "I am so incredibly sorry. Jenna." "Yes. It was real." Jenna slowly turned her face away, staring blankly at the far wall as tears slid silently down her pale cheeks, soaking into the hospital pillow. "Everyone in that room was laughing at me," she said, her voice breaking into a sob. "My own husband's mistress threw a cake at my face, and his friends actually laughed at me." "Not everyone laughed," Lena corrected her gently but firmly. "And the pathetic ones who did, I promise you, they are all facing incredibly serious consequences for it right now." Jenna looked back at her sister, extreme confusion highly evident through her tears. "What do you mean by that?" Lena hesitated for a moment, chewing her lip, unsure if right now, in the ICU, was the appropriate time to explain all about the massive viral video, the internet mob, and the exploding public outcry. But before she could make a final decision, a cheerful, older nurse quietly pushed open the door and entered the room. "Ah, I see she is finally awake," the kind nurse observed with a genuinely warm, comforting smile. "That is absolutely wonderful news. How are you physically feeling right now, Jenna?" "Honestly, like I've been repeatedly hit by a massive truck," Jenna admitted weakly, offering a tiny, pained smile. "Well, considering what you have just physically been through, that is completely to be expected," the nurse said, checking the 4 bags. "Your primary doctor will be in shortly to explain absolutely everything about your surgery and recovery. But in the meantime, there is a very special someone outside who would very much like to officially meet her brave mama, if you are feeling up to it." As the nurse spoke the magical words, another hospital staff member slowly and carefully wheeled a clear, plastic hospital bassinet into the room. Inside rested a tiny, fragile bundle tightly wrapped in a soft pink and blue striped hospital blanket. Despite her overwhelming physical exhaustion and the agonizing pain radiating from her fresh surgical incision, Jenna immediately tried to sit straight up in the bed. "Careful, careful now," the nurse cautioned gently, using a remote to slowly adjust the top half of the mechanical bed to a slight, comfortable incline. "You have a very fresh, major abdominal incision that we need to protect." With practiced, gentle efficiency, the experienced nurse carefully lifted the incredibly tiny baby out of the clear bassinet and gently, softly placed her directly onto Jenna's bare chest, carefully arranging the various tiny tubes and monitor wires that connected the fragile newborn to a portable tracking monitor. "She still needs a little bit of continuous oxygen support," the nurse explained softly, adjusting a tiny nasal cannula. "So, unfortunately, she can only stay down here with you for a few short minutes before she needs to go back to the NICU. But skin-to-skin contact is incredibly beneficial for both of you to regulate heartbeats." Jenna gazed down in absolute, breathless wonder at her tiny daughter's face. Despite the severe, violent trauma of her emergency birth, and despite the catastrophic, heartbreaking betrayal that had directly preceded it, the spiritual connection Jenna felt was absolutely immediate, fiercely primal, and totally overwhelming. The baby's tiny eyes were currently closed tight, her miniature, perfect features relaxed, and a surprisingly thick cap of dark. Soft hair was adorably peeking out from under the edge of the standard issue, knitted hospital beanie. "Hello, my sweet little one," Jenna whispered down to her. Her tears were now falling freely and rapidly for an entirely different, beautiful reason. "I'm your mom. I've got you." Lena stood by the bed and watched the incredibly intimate moment with a massive, painful lump forming in her throat. In the absolute, chaotic midst of an unthinkable life catastrophe, this small, perfect, breathing miracle somehow possessed the magical power to make absolutely everything else in the world recede in importance. "Have you had any time to think of a name for her yet?" the friendly nurse asked, carefully checking the baby's oxygen saturation on the portable monitors. Jenna nodded slowly, her tear-filled eyes never once leaving her daughter's perfectly peaceful face. "Sophia," she said softly, the name feeling perfectly right on her tongue. "It means wisdom, and she is going to need it." As Jenna beautifully bonded with her fragile newborn daughter in the quiet safety of the hospital, Ethan was actively facing a drastically, horribly different kind of reality down in the dark hospital parking lot. Sitting alone in the driver's seat of his expensive luxury car, his cell phone had literally been exploding with non-stop, frantic notifications for hours. He had missed calls from his direct boss, dozens of panicked text messages from his work colleagues, and angry emails from highly lucrative clients who had unfortunately just seen the viral video online. His shocked parents had already left 3 incredibly distressed, confused voicemails, each sounding more panicked and angry than the last. Vanessa had also finally decided to return his desperate calls, but she had only done so to furiously inform him that she had just been officially placed on unpaid administrative leave pending a massive, formal investigation by the firm's ruthless HR department. She screamed into the phone, aggressively blaming Ethan entirely for the spectacular destruction of her life, loudly claiming that he had maliciously misled her about the actual, true state of his marriage. "You specifically told me that she fully knew we were seeing each other." Vanessa had loudly sobbed, her voice bordering on hysterical through the phone speaker. "You manipulated me. You told me that you two were totally separated in all but a legal name. Now my face is everywhere. I am being publicly called a disgusting homewrecker by millions of strangers. And I am getting actual death threats sent to my online accounts." Ethan had absolutely no comfort or solace to offer her. The sheer, terrifying magnitude of exactly what they had selfishly done, what he had done, was finally, truly sinking into his brain. He had deeply, irreparably betrayed his loyal, pregnant wife. He had selfishly and pathologically lied to his naive mistress about the true state of his failing marriage, just to get her into bed. And when the absolute moment of ultimate truth violently arrived in that dining room, he had stood there completely frozen like a coward, failing to protect either woman from the fallout. His phone loudly rang again, vibrating intensely against the console. He looked at the screen. It was his boss, the senior managing partner. With a heavy sigh of absolute resignation, Ethan slowly answered the call. "Ethan, I need you sitting in my private office tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp," the senior partner said coldly, offering absolutely no polite preamble or greeting. "The executive steering committee is actively convening an emergency, mandatory meeting regarding your current, highly public situation." "I understand, sir," Ethan replied numbly, his voice sounding hollow. "I have personally been fielding incredibly angry calls from our top-tier clients all evening, because of you." His furious boss continued, the barely restrained anger in his voice absolutely unmistakable. "This firm's pristine reputation is taking a massive, calculated financial hit every single time that damn video gets shared online. And right now that is happening by the thousands. I am so incredibly sorry, sir," Ethan offered inadequately, desperately trying to sound properly contrite. "Save your pathetic apologies for the committee tomorrow. Just be there." His boss snapped aggressively, and then abruptly slammed the phone down, ending the call. Ethan sat in the terrifying, dark silence of his car, the absolute, crushing enormity of the rapidly collapsing life he had spent years building heavily weighing down on his shoulders. Because of his own arrogant choices, he had permanently jeopardized his once happy marriage, completely destroyed his future relationship with his newborn daughter before it even began, ruined his pristine professional reputation, and severely damaged the elite standing of his powerful firm. And he had gambled all of this away simply for a cheap, sordid office affair that had originally begun as a mildly flattering distraction, but had quickly evolved into a toxic addiction to the cheap excitement and dangerous novelty that Vanessa represented to his bored ego. What had foolishly started with seemingly innocent flirtation in late-night corporate emails and prolonged, secret glances across massive mahogany boardroom tables had rapidly blossomed into an entirely secret, secondary life, one that massively fed his male ego while actively poisoning absolutely everything else he held dear. As the harsh, neon hospital parking lights reflected off his windshield, Ethan made a firm, desperate decision in his mind. He would stay and fight to make things right. He would get down on his knees and beg for Jenna's forgiveness. He would promise to go to therapy, to be a much better, faithful man, to be a completely devoted, hands-on father to Sophia. He actively rehearsed the desperate, pleading words in his mind over and over like a sacred prayer. I will change for you. I will do better. I will fix this mess. But even as he mentally imagined saying the words to her face, a deep, hollow, terrifying ache in his chest sharply reminded him that his words might never be enough again. He desperately tried to convince himself. Surely, once the initial, explosive shock of the party finally wore off, Jenna would calm down and logically see that officially breaking up their established family wasn't the correct answer. They had a long, shared history together. They had just bought a house. They had a beautiful child. All of that history had to count for something, didn't it? With this false, desperate resolution artificially firming his spine, Ethan finally started the car and drove home to the massive, suddenly incredibly empty house he had once so happily shared with Jenna. He was completely, tragically unaware that the severe emotional and public damage he had brutally caused was already far, far too extensive for any simple, tearful apologies to ever repair. By the time the sun rose the next morning, what had simply begun the night before as a shocking viral video had drastically transformed into a massive, full-blown, uncontrollable social media firestorm. And it absolutely wasn't just Jenna's local friends and angry colleagues sharing the footage anymore. The shocking story had aggressively leapt into the mainstream national conversation, heavily fueled by a potent public mixture of righteous outrage, deep empathy for a mother, and pure, unfiltered fury at the audacity of the affair. The hashtag Justice for Jenna was actively trending in the top 3 spots nationally on Twitter, with millions of people from absolutely all walks of life loudly expressing their profound disgust at the cruel, unusual treatment of a vulnerable pregnant woman by her cheating husband, his arrogant mistress, and the sickeningly laughing bystanders who did nothing. Dozens of local and national news vans with large satellite dishes had rapidly gathered on the sidewalks outside St. Thomas Medical Center, though the hospital's dedicated security team was successfully keeping the aggressive reporters at bay. Bright camera flashes flared wildly every single time a new ambulance arrived at the emergency bay. On morning television, various legal and social commentators actively debated and speculated endlessly about the ethics of the workplace, the psychology of infidelity, and the emotional violence prevalent in modern toxic relationships. Without ever speaking a word to the press, Jenna had rapidly become a national symbol of wronged womanhood, a heavy, public mantle she had never once asked to carry. Ethan's prestigious investment firm, Barkley & Walsh, had been forced into panic mode. The PR team had hastily issued a very terse, legally approved public statement explicitly stating that they were currently investigating the highly disturbing matter internally, and that they absolutely did not, under any circumstances, condone the type of unprofessional, cruel behavior clearly depicted in the viral video. However, the damage was already bleeding the company dry. Several of Ethan's most lucrative, high-profile corporate clients had already publicly and loudly announced on their own social media pages that they were immediately taking their massive portfolios and business elsewhere. They were completely unwilling to be publicly associated in any way with a senior portfolio manager whose personal, moral conduct was so clearly, fundamentally at odds with their own corporate values and public image. The firm's highly paid PR department was actively scrambling in full damage control mode, while Ethan's name continued to trend aggressively online, not for his brilliant financial portfolio wins or market predictions, but for standing completely, pathetically motionless while a heavy cake exploded violently across his pregnant wife's chest. Meanwhile, completely insulated inside the quiet, secure, and highly restricted environment of the hospital's NICU, Jenna sat comfortably in a padded wheelchair positioned right beside her tiny daughter's plastic incubator. A very different kind of media narrative was actively playing out on the small, mounted television screen on the wall above them. A perfectly coiffed local news anchor was actively discussing the shocking restaurant incident with a look of barely concealed, professional disgust on her face. Sources very close to the family have officially confirmed that both the mother and the newborn baby are currently resting in stable condition this morning. The anchor reported smoothly to the camera, following the intense, stress-induced premature delivery at a local Italian restaurant. The husband, publicly identified by internet users as Ethan Caldwell, a highly paid senior investment manager at the prestigious firm Barkley & Walsh, has not yet issued any formal public statement regarding the horrific incident. The female anchor's judgmental tone heavily and purposely lingered on the words, "not issued any statement," making his continued cowardly public silence sound exactly like a second, deliberate betrayal of his family. Jenna's mother, sitting in a chair nearby, immediately reached forward, grabbed the plastic remote, and aggressively muted the television, cutting off the anchor's voice. "You absolutely do not need to sit here and listen to this garbage right now, sweetheart," she said protectively, her eyes filled with maternal worry. Jenna's tired eyes remained intensely, lovingly fixed on her tiny daughter inside the plastic box. Sophia was already breathing much easier that morning, according to the optimistic rounds from the attending NICU doctors. Her impossibly tiny chest steadily rose and fell inside the warm incubator like a fragile, beautiful promise, one that Jenna was absolutely determined she had to keep, no matter the cost. "It is okay, Mom," Jenna said softly, never looking away from the baby. "Truly, it doesn't even matter to me anymore. What they say on TV doesn't matter." But despite her brave words, her exhausted voice wavered just slightly, as if a tiny, broken part of her heart still secretly wished that Ethan's defense actually did matter. Her father, Thomas, who had been standing rigidly and protectively like a nightclub bouncer near the sliding glass door of the room, loudly scoffed in disagreement. "Doesn't matter?" he repeated, his voice thick with paternal outrage. "That pathetic excuse for a man publicly humiliated you in front of everyone you know. He brought his psychotic girlfriend to your party, and she physically assaulted you. Their selfish, reckless actions directly endangered my beautiful granddaughter's life last night. It absolutely, unequivocally matters, Jenna." Jenna finally looked up from the incubator, turning to face her furious father. Her pale expression was incredibly calm and resolute, despite the lingering, visible pallor of her skin from the blood loss. "Dad, I mean that the circus of media coverage doesn't matter to me," she clarified gently. "What the internet thinks of him doesn't matter. What truly matters in this world is right here in this plastic box." She reached her hand through the small, circular porthole of the incubator and gently stroked her index finger against Sophia's impossibly tiny hand. The premature infant immediately and reflexively gripped her mother's finger surprisingly tight. "Absolutely everything else outside this room is just meaningless noise," Jenna said softly. Her parents exchanged deeply concerned, worried glances over her head. Their daughter's complete, zen-like composure seemed almost unnatural, perhaps dangerously so, given the extreme, catastrophic circumstances of the last 24 hours. The attending obstetrician had specifically warned them earlier that morning that Jenna might experience periods of profound emotional numbness or detachment as a highly common psychological protective mechanism against the severe, compounding trauma she had just endured. The door opened quietly, and Lena entered the NICU, carrying a large duffel bag. She had just returned from making a quick trip to Jenna's house to pack a bag with fresh, comfortable clothes, nursing bras, and her favorite toiletries. The hospital security guards actually had to stop me on the way in through the lobby, Lena reported, dropping the heavy bag onto a chair with a sigh. Ethan is downstairs right now. He is desperately trying to get past the front desk to come up and see you and the baby. They are keeping him contained in the main lobby for now. Jenna's perfectly calm facade finally cracked slightly, a shadow of genuine anxiety passing over her eyes. I absolutely do not want to see him, she said quietly, her heart rate monitor ticking up slightly. You do not have to see him, her father immediately assured her, stepping forward and cracking his knuckles. I will personally go down there and handle it. As Thomas turned aggressively to leave the room, ready for a physical confrontation, Jenna quickly called after him. Dad, please. No big scenes, please. No yelling. I just want him to quietly go away. Her father nodded his head reluctantly, reining in his anger for her sake, and then marched out of the room, heading straight for the elevators to intercept his disgraced son-in-law in the hospital lobby. Downstairs, Ethan sat stiffly on an incredibly uncomfortable, hard plastic chair near the entrance. A small, expensive, pink teddy bear from the hospital gift shop was clutched desperately in his sweating hands. He looked utterly destroyed. He had come to the hospital directly from his mandatory 8 a.m. disciplinary meeting at the firm, where things had gone exactly as horribly as he had feared. He had been officially, permanently placed on indefinite, unpaid administrative leave pending a full, exhaustive corporate investigation. When he was told to clear out his office, his former friends and colleagues had completely averted their eyes, staring at their shoes as he awkwardly packed his belongings into a cardboard box. Absolutely no one wanted to be seen associating with the toxic man whose face was currently being violently vilified and memed across the entire internet. When Ethan finally looked up and saw Jenna's father aggressively approaching him through the crowded lobby, he stood up quickly, a pathetic glimmer of false hope flashing across his deeply haggard, unshaven features. Thomas, thank God. Thank you so much for coming down here to talk to me. I desperately need to go upstairs and see Jenna and the baby. I've been trying to get past security all morning, but they won't let me up. Thomas stopped a few feet away and held up a large, calloused hand like a stop sign. Stop right there. Jenna does not want to see your face. Not right now, and honestly, maybe not ever again. Ethan's face immediately fell, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Thomas, please. She can't legally or morally keep me away from my own daughter. I have a right to see her. Your daughter? Thomas's booming voice rose dangerously loud, immediately drawing highly curious glances from nearby visitors and the security guards stationed at the desk. He took a deep breath, making a highly visible, physical effort to control his violent temper for his daughter's sake. The exact same daughter you actively told your little girlfriend wasn't even yours? The exact same daughter who was born a month early and is struggling to breathe right now entirely because of your disgusting, selfish actions? I made a terrible, stupid mistake, Ethan admitted, his bloodshot eyes pleading for a shred of sympathy. I made so many horrible mistakes, Thomas. But I swear to you, I love Jenna. I love our baby. I want to do whatever it takes to make things right again. Thomas stood tall and regarded his son-in-law with a look of absolute, icy cold assessment. He looked at Ethan as if he were a particularly disgusting bug on the bottom of his shoe. Ethan, I have known you personally for 7 years. I proudly welcomed you into our family. I trusted you completely with my daughter's heart and her happiness. And looking at you now, I see that I never really knew you at all. You are a stranger. Good people make mistakes, Thomas, Ethan insisted desperately, clutching the pink bear tighter. Jenna and I can go to counseling. We can work through this mess if she just gives me a chance to explain. This was not a simple mistake, Ethan. Thomas's voice was deathly calm but cuttingly sharp, slicing right through Ethan's pathetic delusions. A mistake is accidentally forgetting a wedding anniversary. A mistake is saying something thoughtless in a moment of stupid anger. You systematically carried on a calculated, secret affair for 6 entire months. You lied to everyone around you. You lied about your own innocent child's paternity to another woman. And then the grand finale. You stood by like an absolute coward while your heavily pregnant wife was publicly assaulted and humiliated, putting her into premature, life-threatening labor. Those are not mistakes, Ethan. Those are deliberate, calculated choices. And those choices entirely reveal your true, rotten character. Ethan stood there with his mouth slightly open, having absolutely no logical response to the incredibly stark, brutally accurate assessment. Thomas continued, stepping slightly closer and lowering his voice to a menacing growl. Jenna has officially instructed the hospital security team that you are absolutely not permitted anywhere near her room or the NICU ward. She has also officially contacted her divorce lawyer this morning. I highly suggest you do the same and find yourself good representation. Her lawyer? Ethan echoed the words, sounding completely, genuinely stunned by the speed of it all. It has been less than 24 hours since the party. Yes, it has been less than 24 hours, Thomas pointed out coldly, his eyes narrowing. And in those terrifying hours, my daughter almost bled to death on an operating table, bringing your child into this world. Perhaps staring death in the face has perfectly clarified her thinking about exactly what kind of life she truly deserves. It certainly has clarified things for me. With that final, devastating blow delivered, Thomas turned his back and confidently walked away toward the elevators, leaving Ethan standing entirely alone in the middle of the bustling lobby. He stood there clutching the small, pathetic pink teddy bear, completely surrounded by dozens of whispering strangers who were actively, stealthily stealing curious glances and pulling out their phones to take pictures of the disgraced man they all easily recognized from the massive viral video. Exactly 1 week later, Jenna stood quietly at the large window of her private hospital room, looking down at the street below. She watched patiently as Lena pulled her practical SUV around to the front entrance circle. After a long, grueling week of intense medical recovery for both mother and daughter, they were finally being officially discharged to go home. Little Sophia, though she was still noticeably smaller than average for a newborn, had demonstrated incredible, fierce resilience over the past 7 days. She had quickly and successfully graduated from needing continuous oxygen support and was now breathing perfectly on her own, passing all her required infant car seat tests. The physical, painful wounds from Jenna's emergency C-section were healing remarkably well, according to the deeply impressed surgical team. The deep, invisible emotional wounds from the trauma would undoubtedly take much, much longer to heal. But Jenna had genuinely surprised everyone around her, especially herself, with her incredible, unbreakable clarity and resolve. A soft knock at the hospital room door interrupted her quiet thoughts. Jenna turned away from the window, fully expecting to see a nurse walking in with the final stack of discharge paperwork, but instead found Monica, her closest friend, standing there. "Are you ready for the great escape?" Monica asked playfully, entering the room carrying a massive, beautifully decorated gift bag. Jenna smiled widely, a look of genuine, unfiltered warmth finally breaking through her previously reserved, guarded expression. "More than ready. I can't wait to sleep in my own bed. The hospital food is exactly everything they say it is." Monica set the heavy bag down on the chair and stepped forward to embrace her dear friend carefully, highly mindful of her fresh, healing surgical incision. "How are you really doing?" she asked quietly, pulling back and intensely studying Jenna's pale face for signs of cracking. "I am surviving," Jenna said, slowly moving to sit on the edge of the neatly made hospital bed. "Physically, I am getting a little bit better every single day. Emotionally, I am still trying to figure that part out. Honestly, It mostly feels like I am just watching a movie of someone else's life completely implode. Except occasionally, I violently remember that it's actually mine." Monica nodded her head sympathetically, sitting down beside her. "That is a completely normal, expected trauma response. Your brain is intelligently protecting you while you slowly process everything that happened," Monica said gently. Her voice was steady and calm, but her eyes held that specific, worried softness strictly reserved only for someone who has helplessly watched a loved one completely break and then slowly begin to rebuild themselves from the ashes. "The hospital therapist they sent to my room yesterday said the exact same thing," Jenna acknowledged with a slight nod. "She also told me that it is completely okay to not have all the answers figured out right now." Her voice remained incredibly steady, but there was a tiny, noticeable flicker of profound sadness beneath the heavy weight of absolutely everything she hadn't yet managed to say out loud. "Well, she sounds like a very wise woman," Monica approved, patting Jenna's knee. "So, practically speaking, what happens next?" "Mom and Dad desperately want me to go stay with them at their house for a while. But I said no. I told them I need to go back to my own house. I need to stand on my own 2 feet, and I need to figure out exactly who I am now." She paused for a long moment, looking down at her hands, as if hearing the bold words for the very first time herself. The old version of Jenna, the one who had so blindly relied on Ethan's promises and protection, no longer existed. That woman had died in the dining room at Giovanni's. Jenna's soft eyes drifted over to the clear bassinet where baby Sophia slept incredibly peacefully, completely oblivious to the chaos surrounding her birth. The steady, reassuring rise and fall of her tiny daughter's chest immediately steadied Jenna's racing heart. It was a beautiful, quiet reminder that true healing did not always have to be loud or dramatic to be incredibly powerful. Besides, she added practically, my parents' old place is completely full of steep stairs, which is definitely not ideal with a newborn baby and a fresh C-section incision. She tried to offer a genuine smile, but the bone-deep fatigue resting just beneath it was completely unmistakable. "Where exactly will he go?" Monica asked carefully, not wanting to say Ethan's name. "He is already gone. Home is mine for now," Jenna stated firmly. "Ethan formally moved the vast majority of his clothes and personal things out of the house yesterday, while I was still here. According to what Lena told me, he is currently staying long-term at a downtown hotel while we—" Jenna hesitated slightly, stumbling over the heavy final word. "While we separate." Monica raised an inquisitive eyebrow. "Just separating?" It wasn't a tone of harsh judgment. It was a tone of deep, painful knowing. It was the specific kind of knowing that only came from helplessly watching far too many good friends give undeserved second chances to toxic men who never even deserved the first ones. Jenna's gaze hardened instantly, the softness completely vanishing. "Just separating for now, strictly because my lawyer strongly advised me to take things methodically, one strategic step at a time. The absolute first priority was legally getting a temporary order of protection against Vanessa based on the physical assault. The second priority was aggressively securing interim, court-ordered financial support for Sophia and me to survive on while I am out of work on maternity leave. The actual, final divorce filing is step 3. Her voice did not shake even a fraction of an inch. It did not rise in anger. It was perfectly measured. It was delivered not with any hesitation, but with absolute, cold clarity. "So, you have firmly decided then? There's no going back?" Monica asked gently. Jenna nodded her head slowly, her jaw set tight. "I keep lying awake at night, constantly thinking about that exact moment when Vanessa was screaming those horrible accusations at me, and Ethan just stood there. He didn't deny a single thing she said. He didn't verbally defend me. He didn't step in front of me. He didn't even try to lift a finger to stop her from violently throwing the cake at my face." She looked directly into Monica's eyes. "If he couldn't find the courage to protect me in a restaurant full of our friends, Then how in the world could I ever possibly trust him to protect Sophia from the real dangers of the world? The agonizing memory still burned hotly in her mind. Not really because of the nasty things Vanessa had screamed, but entirely because of Ethan's deafening, cowardly silence. His pathetic stillness in that room had spoken so much louder than the actual betrayal of the affair ever could. Monica reached out and squeezed her friend's hand tightly. "You are making the absolute right choice, Jenna. And I need you to know that you are not alone in this fight." Her physical grip was incredibly firm and grounding, radiating the specific kind of unwavering, foundational support that loudly said, "Even if you completely fall apart, I will be standing right here to catch you." Speaking of not being alone, Monica continued, purposefully lightening her tone as she reached down for the massive gift bag she had lugged into the room. "This is from absolutely everyone at the office. We all took up a huge collection for you." Jenna leaned over and carefully opened the bag. Inside, she was stunned to find a high-end, portable travel bassinet, several massive economy packages of premium newborn diapers, expensive baby lotions, and a thick, white envelope. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers to find a beautiful greeting card filled and signed by dozens of her supportive colleagues, completely overflowing with messages of love. Tucked inside the card was a surprisingly substantial, highly loaded gift card to the most expensive baby supply store in the city. Every single scribbled signature on that card felt to Jenna like a strong thread in a massive safety net that she hadn't even realized had been strung up beneath her all along. Thick tears immediately filled Jenna's eyes, threatening to spill over. "This is so incredibly generous of everyone," she whispered, overwhelmed by the kindness. "That is actually not all of it," Monica continued, smiling broadly. "I spoke with the senior partners yesterday. They have officially voted to extend your standard maternity leave to a full 16 weeks, entirely fully paid. They specifically told me to tell you to take absolutely all the time you need to heal and bond with the baby. Your job is 100% safe." Jenna was momentarily, completely speechless, pressing a hand to her mouth. "I don't even know what to say to them." "Just say that you will let your friends help you," Monica suggested gently, wiping a tear from her own eye. "You have always been the fiercely strong one in our group, Jenna. You are always the one who has everything perfectly under control, planning the trips, solving the problems. But I need you to learn that even the strongest, bravest people in the world need a little support sometimes." Monica's tone shifted, sounding almost pleading, a beautiful reminder that true love doesn't always have to roar to be heard. Sometimes it just quietly shows up with diapers and a shoulder to cry on. Before Jenna could even attempt to formulate a proper response to the overwhelming generosity, a young nurse entered the room, pushing a small metal cart. "Are we all ready to finally go home, Mom?" she asked cheerfully, holding a clipboard. "I just need your final signature on these discharge papers, and you and little Miss Sophia are officially free to go." As Jenna happily signed her name on the dotted lines of the paperwork, Lena dramatically appeared in the hospital room doorway, carrying the heavy infant car seat over her arm. "Your chariot officially awaits, my lady," she announced loudly with a deep, exaggerated, theatrical bow. For the very first time in what truly felt like ages to her, Jenna actually laughed out loud. It was a genuine, beautiful, spontaneous sound of joy that seemed to completely surprise even herself. It was a small, fleeting moment of lightness piercing through what had undeniably been the darkest, most terrifying week of her entire life. It was a powerful, necessary reminder that profound joy could absolutely still exist in the world right alongside profound pain. Outside the main doors of the hospital, a few persistent, hungry reporters and freelance paparazzi still aggressively lingered on the sidewalk, desperately hoping to snap a profitable glimpse of the famous woman whose tragic story had so completely captivated the public imagination. However, the hospital's dedicated security team quickly formed a tight, physical protective barrier as Lena pulled the large SUV around, perfectly shielding Jenna and the fragile baby from the blinding, flashing cameras and prying, greedy eyes. As they finally drove away from the looming campus of St. Thomas Medical Center, Jenna leaned her head back and gazed quietly out the passenger window at the bustling city passing by. The world somehow looked completely different to her now. The vibrant colors of the city seemed sharper, the contrast of light and shadow more strictly defined. Or perhaps, she mused, it was Jenna herself who had fundamentally changed. Her entire perspective on humanity had been violently, permanently altered by the massive seismic shifts in her personal life. "Are you doing okay over there?" Lena asked quietly, glancing back at her sister in the rearview mirror while navigating the city traffic. Jenna looked down at tiny Sophia, who was currently sleeping incredibly peacefully, strapped securely in her padded car seat. She then looked back up at the open road stretching out ahead of them. "I will be," she answered softly. And for the very first time since the night of the party, she was profoundly surprised to discover that she actually believed it. Meanwhile, completely across town, Ethan sat rigidly in the sterile, glass-walled office of Barkley and Walsh's notoriously ruthless HR director. Vivian Grant was a terrifyingly stern, unsmiling woman who had been fiercely protecting the firm's assets for 20 years. Sitting directly beside her at the large desk was Charles Walsh himself, the firm's legendary founding partner. His deeply lined, aristocratic expression was completely grave and unreadable. "The Executive Steering Committee has officially concluded its thorough, internal review of your highly public situation," Vivian stated formally, reading from a prepared document. "Due to the incredibly serious, viral nature of the public allegations and the massive, quantifiable negative publicity that is actively, negatively affecting our elite client relationships and bottom line, we have absolutely no choice but to officially terminate your employment with this firm, effective immediately." Ethan had realistically been expecting to hear this exact outcome for days, but the brutal, final reality of the words still hit him like a massive, physical blow to the stomach. "I understand," he managed to choke out, his throat dry. "Your abhorrent personal actions reflect incredibly poorly on the high standards of this firm," Mr. Walsh added coldly, his deep disapproval highly evident in every syllable. "We have actively lost 3 major, multi-million-dollar corporate clients in just the past week because they refused to be associated with you. Our long-standing, pristine reputation for elite discretion, morality, and absolute integrity has been massively, perhaps permanently, compromised by your complete lack of judgment." "What about Vanessa?" Ethan asked desperately, grasping at straws. "Is she being officially terminated today as well?" Vivian's thin lips pressed tightly together into a hard line. "Miss Roberts formally submitted her resignation to my office yesterday afternoon. That particular matter is entirely closed." Ethan slowly nodded his head, completely unsurprised by the news. Vanessa had made it incredibly, violently clear over the phone that she wanted absolutely nothing more to do with him or the disastrous situation. Her last text message to him had been brutally, chillingly blunt. "My entire life is completely ruined strictly because of your lies. Do not ever attempt to contact me again. You will officially receive 2 weeks of standard severance pay," Vivian continued coldly, pushing a folder across the desk. "Your personal effects from your office have already been securely packed into boxes and are currently waiting for you down at the main reception desk. Due to the extreme sensitivity of our elite client financial information, you will be physically escorted from the building by security immediately after this meeting concludes." It was a truly stunning, spectacular fall from grace. Just one incredibly short week ago, Ethan had been considered a rising star, firmly on the fast track to making full partner at the firm within the next 2 years. Now he was literally being treated like a dangerous corporate spy or a security risk. His once promising career was completely in shambles, and his professional reputation in the tight-knit financial sector was entirely destroyed. "Is there anything else you would like to formally say for the record?" Charles Walsh asked, his icy tone heavily suggesting there was absolutely nothing Ethan could possibly say to ever improve the terrible situation. Ethan considered the question for a long, painful moment. I would just like to sincerely apologize for the massive financial and reputational harm I have caused the firm. My massive, personal moral failures absolutely shouldn't have affected Barkley and Walsh's reputation. Mr. Walsh's stony expression did not soften a single fraction of an inch. Perhaps, Ethan, you should have logically considered that exact possibility before actively conducting a highly inappropriate, secret workplace relationship and carelessly allowing it to explode into a massive public spectacle. The brief, brutal meeting concluded shortly after that final reprimand. Exactly as promised, Ethan was flanked by two large, unsmiling security guards and humiliatingly escorted down to the main lobby. As he awkwardly carried the heavy cardboard box containing his meager office belongings out to his car in the parking garage, he couldn't help but deeply notice the disgusted, sideways glances and blatant whispering from his former colleagues, who all actively hurried past him without speaking a single word. In the incredibly short span of just one single week, Ethan had managed to completely lose his beautiful, loyal wife, his comfortable, luxurious home, his highly lucrative job, and his pristine public reputation. Even his own parents had called to loudly express their profound, heartbroken disappointment in his character, with his mother actually crying openly and hysterically during their last agonizing phone call. The absolute only thing he currently had left in the world was his biological connection to Sophia, a tiny daughter he had yet to even meet in person, born into chaotic, tragic circumstances he could scarcely have imagined a month ago. As he slowly drove his car away from the towering glass office building for the very last time, Ethan became fiercely resolved that, whatever else happened in his ruined life, he would relentlessly fight to be a father to his child. It was the absolute only relationship he still had a microscopic chance to build properly from the very beginning. What Ethan did not yet fully understand, however, was that successfully rebuilding any fractured part of his life would fundamentally require aggressively confronting the deep, toxic, fundamental character flaws that had inevitably led him to this disastrous point in the first place. It would be a grueling, agonizing psychological process that would ultimately be much more difficult and deeply painful than simply losing his external, superficial markers of financial success. Exactly 2 weeks after safely returning home from the hospital, Jenna sat comfortably in the incredibly elegant, mahogany-paneled office of Diana Winters. Diana was widely regarded as one of the city's most absolutely formidable, ruthless, and successful divorce attorneys. Sophia slept peacefully in her expensive infant carrier placed gently on the floor beside Jenna's leather chair, completely oblivious to the incredibly serious, life-altering legal discussions that would permanently shape her entire future. Let us be completely, absolutely clear right now about your ultimate priorities here, Diana said, leaning across her massive desk. Her elegant, silver-streaked hair was pulled tightly back into a severe, no-nonsense bun that perfectly matched her intimidating, shark-like professional demeanor. What exactly matters the absolute most to you in this divorce settlement, Jenna? Jenna had been awake for countless nights, giving this exact question considerable, agonizing thought. Absolute financial security for Sophia and myself, she answered without hesitation, her voice strong. I want primary physical custody of my daughter, with appropriate, heavily restricted visitation rights for Ethan. I am not a monster. I won't maliciously keep him from knowing his daughter, Jenna said reasonably. But I absolutely need to be the one making all the major day-to-day decisions regarding her life, her health, and her schooling. And secondly, I want to keep the house. I painstakingly designed every single square inch of that beautiful nursery myself. I cannot physically bear the agonizing thought of leaving it now. Her voice wavered incredibly slightly on the last sentence, not from any sense of legal uncertainty, but from the deep, lingering emotional ache of seeing her perfect dream home, now heavily laced with the invisible, toxic ghosts of his betrayal. Diana nodded her head approvingly, rapidly jotting down notes on her legal pad. Those are all highly reasonable, achievable requests. Given the extremely dramatic, documented circumstances of your sudden separation, and the massive mountain of undeniable public evidence we currently possess. I firmly believe we are standing in an incredibly strong, dominant position to aggressively negotiate highly favorable terms for you. Her tone was smooth, calm, but undeniably firm, the exact kind of unshakable confidence Jenna had quickly learned to lean on in these difficult recent days. By evidence, you specifically mean the viral video? Jenna clarified, her pale expression tightening uncomfortably. She deeply hated the sickening fact that her absolute, most humiliating, agonizing public moment had somehow miraculously become her most powerful, valuable piece of legal leverage. Precisely, Diana confirmed, tapping her expensive pen against the desk. While we currently live in a strictly no-fault divorce state, meaning we technically do not have to definitively prove his blatant misconduct to legally obtain a standard divorce decree, possessing undeniable, high-definition video evidence of his blatant adultery, combined with his horrific behavior that directly led to a massive medical incident at your birthday party, can and absolutely will heavily influence the presiding judge regarding the division of property, and most importantly, the final custody arrangements. Diana's words were highly clinical and legally precise, but the heavy subtext underneath them was razor-sharp. The strict letter of the law might not officially punish a man for simple betrayal, but the human judge sitting on the bench could certainly still heavily weigh his moral failures when making a final ruling. Jenna shifted quite uncomfortably in the expensive leather chair. I just hate that my sheer, public humiliation has become a bargaining chip. The vivid, sickening mental image of that sticky frosting slowly dripping down her face in front of dozens of laughing people still reliably made her stomach violently twist into knots. Diana's highly professional, rigid demeanor softened slightly, showing a rare glimpse of empathy. I completely understand how painful that must be, Jenna. But you must constantly remember this. You absolutely did not create this horrific situation. Your husband willfully and repeatedly made selfish, destructive choices that directly led to these catastrophic consequences. We are simply stepping in to legally ensure that those consequences do not unfairly include severe financial hardship or emotional distress for you and your innocent daughter. Diana paused for a moment, purposely letting the powerful words land and resonate in Jenna's mind. You are not taking petty revenge here, Jenna. You are actively legally protecting your child's future. There is a massive difference. Down on the floor, baby Sophia stirred restlessly in her padded carrier, making tiny, soft whimpering sounds that Jenna had already quickly learned to perfectly recognize as the early precursors to hunger. With highly practiced, gentle movements, she carefully unbuckled her daughter, lifted her warmly into her arms, and discreetly prepared to nurse her under a soft blanket. The simple, incredibly beautiful, biological ritual instantly grounded her racing mind. It was a perfectly quiet, peaceful moment of pure motherhood occurring right in the middle of the chaotic, clinical strategy of legal warfare. "Is this okay to do in here?" she politely asked the intimidating attorney. "Of course it is," Diana assured her with a genuinely warm smile. "I raised 3 children of my own while building this firm. Now, let us move on and discuss our immediate next steps. Have you and Ethan communicated directly at all since you left the hospital last week?" Jenna shook her head slowly side to side as she settled Sophia comfortably against her breast. "Absolutely not. He has only been able to communicate through Lena or my parents. He has sent me several dozen desperate text messages practically begging to come see the baby. But I have firmly told him via text that I want absolutely all communication to go strictly through our respective lawyers for now." Her voice held absolutely no bitter venom, just strong, massive steel boundaries, newly built and fiercely, aggressively guarded. "That is incredibly wise," Diana approved, making another note. "And the temporary restraining order you filed against Vanessa Roberts remains firmly in place?" "Yes," Jenna confirmed. "Though honestly, I haven't seen hide nor hair of her, or heard a single word from her since that awful night. According to what Lena's online sources managed to dig up, she completely fled the city. She moved all the way back to Chicago to live in hiding with her parents after she was forced to resign from the firm. The very mention of the woman's name still felt like chewing on broken glass in Jenna's mouth. Vanessa had physically vanished like a ghost, but the massive, catastrophic damage she had left in her wake remained entirely, painfully real. Diana made a quick, decisive note in her thick file. Good riddance. That is one less annoying complication for us to deal with. Now, moving on to your husband. Ethan has officially retained legal counsel. He hired Gerald Hoffman. Gerald is a highly respected, veteran family law attorney whom I have personally faced in court many times over the years. He's competent. Gerald has officially requested a preliminary sit-down meeting between the four of us to discuss drafting a temporary arrangement while the lengthy divorce process officially proceeds through the courts. Jenna nodded gently, tenderly stroking Sophia's chubby, soft cheek as the baby happily nursed. The infant's skin was impossibly soft and pure, a stark, beautiful reminder of absolutely all that still desperately needed protecting in this ugly world. When is this meeting? Next week, if you're feeling physically up to it, Diana replied. And you absolutely would not need to be in the same room or even see Ethan. This would strictly be a structured meeting between the attorneys, with our respective clients waiting in entirely separate rooms to avoid conflict. That is perfectly fine with me, Jenna agreed immediately. The sooner we legally establish some incredibly clear, unbreakable boundaries on paper, the better. And this time, she fully intended to enforce those boundaries with the full, crushing weight of the law behind her. Diana sat back and studied her new client with a look of deep professional assessment. Jenna Caldwell presented a highly compelling, sympathetic figure for a courtroom. She was a beautiful new mother, still visibly physically recovering from a highly traumatic, near-fatal emergency birth, yet she was currently demonstrating remarkable, unbreakable emotional composure and strategic clarity. If they actually did end up going to trial in a courtroom, a judge would undoubtedly be incredibly sympathetic to her terrible situation, especially with that infamous viral video actively providing such incredibly damning, undeniable visual evidence of her husband's callous betrayal. There is just one more minor thing we should probably discuss today, Diana said carefully, folding her hands. The highly public, viral nature of your specific situation. That video has unfortunately received millions upon millions of views worldwide. I imagine you have been aggressively approached by the media for exclusive interviews. I understand, Jenna sighed, nodding reluctantly. Yes. I have been contacted by dozens of major news outlets, 2 national daytime talk shows, and even some independent documentary filmmaker. I have completely ignored and declined every single one of them. That is absolutely, incredibly wise during active, pending litigation, Diana agreed strongly. Anything you say on television can and will be twisted. However, you should definitely be mentally prepared for continued, aggressive public interest in your life. Ethan's attorney, Gerald, may attempt to argue to the judge that the massive viral nature of the leaked video has unfairly prejudiced public opinion against his client, making it impossible for him to get a fair hearing. The video only shows exactly what actually happened in reality, Jenna pointed out sharply, her eyes flashing. It isn't a deep fake. I didn't create the situation, and I certainly didn't distribute the video to the news. That is entirely true, Diana said soothingly, but public perception heavily matters in these high-profile cases. We need to be fully prepared to aggressively counter any ridiculous argument that Ethan is somehow being unfairly victimized or villainized by the evil media. Jenna let out a dry, completely humorless laugh. He entirely villainized himself the exact second he stood there with his hands in his pockets and watched his psychotic mistress physically assault his pregnant wife in front of a crowd. Diana's thin, calculating smile fully acknowledged the absolute truth of the point. Indeed, he did. We will plan to meet again right here before next week's preliminary negotiation discussion. In the meantime, I need you to continue meticulously documenting every single attempted communication from Ethan. And call my office immediately if Vanessa attempts to contact you in any way in violation of the active restraining order." As Jenna slowly gathered her heavy bags to leave the office, Diana offered one final, highly observant observation. "You know, Jenna, many of my clients who find themselves in your exact position are completely, functionally still in shock at this early stage. They are usually screaming, incredibly angry, desperately vengeful, or just completely, functionally overwhelmed with grief. You, however, seem remarkably, incredibly focused." Jenna paused at the heavy oak door. She glanced down lovingly at little Sophia, who was now fully asleep against her shoulder, a tiny bubble of milk on her lips. "I genuinely do not have the absolute luxury of falling apart right now, Diana. Every single decision I make from this day forward completely affects her life and her future." She looked up and met the intimidating attorney's gaze directly, her own eyes filled with unbreakable steel. "Besides, I already wasted far too many of my tears on Ethan Caldwell while I was lying in that hospital bed. I am officially done crying over a man who could consciously choose to hurt me so deliberately." Diana nodded her head approvingly, deeply impressed. "Channel that exact clarity, Jenna. Protect it. It will serve you incredibly well in the difficult courtroom months ahead." Right across town, Ethan sat slumped in a considerably less imposing, slightly cluttered office, anxiously facing his own retained attorney. Gerald Hoffman was a man well into his 60s, possessing the incredibly patient, weary demeanor of someone who had professionally seen absolutely every possible, ugly manifestation of marital discord over his long 40-year legal career. The preliminary negotiation meeting with Jenna's side is officially set for next Wednesday afternoon. Gerald casually informed him, flipping through a file. "Diana Winters is incredibly tough, but she is generally fair. She will undoubtedly come in highly prepared with a list of incredibly specific, aggressive demands regarding temporary financial support and physical custody arrangements while the actual divorce officially proceeds through the system." He slowly adjusted his reading glasses as he spoke, his tone completely professional, but with a slight, warning edge that heavily suggested even he fully knew this absolutely wouldn't be an easy, smooth negotiation. Ethan leaned forward anxiously, his hands clasped tightly together. "Will Jenna actually be there? I really, desperately need to talk to her face to face. I need to make her understand that." His voice cracked painfully, the sheer desperation heavily bleeding through his words despite his absolute best. Pathetic efforts to sound composed and in control. Gerald immediately held up a hand, stopping him. "No, Ethan. You absolutely will not see Jenna next week. This is strictly a structured meeting between the attorneys. The clients will remain in completely separate rooms specifically to avoid any direct, explosive emotional confrontation at this highly volatile stage. And Ethan, I have to be completely, brutally frank with you right now. Your current legal standing and position in this matter is absolutely not strong." Gerald didn't bother to sugarcoat the bad news. There simply wasn't any time for comforting illusions anymore. Ethan's shoulders slumped heavily in defeat. "Because of the viral video?" "Partially, yes," Gerald nodded seriously. "The video presents incredibly compelling, undeniable visual evidence of both your infidelity and, more concerningly to a judge, behavior that directly endangered the physical health of your wife and your unborn child. But looking at it more broadly, Ethan, your reckless actions have created a massive, highly public narrative that is incredibly difficult for us to counter in court." Gerald leaned in closer, speaking much more quietly and intensely now. "You didn't just quietly cheat on your wife in a motel room, Ethan. You actively allowed complete, violent chaos to unfold around a heavily pregnant woman whom you had sworn vows to protect. And you did it right in front of a massive audience of your peers. And unfortunately for us, the internet never, ever forgets. You conducted an affair while she was pregnant. Your mistress publicly humiliated her, triggering a life-threatening early labor. You have now lost your highly lucrative job as a direct result. These undeniable, public facts do not exactly position you favorably for demanding aggressive custody negotiations." Each blunt word from the experienced lawyer landed squarely on Ethan like a heavy physical blow. Ethan winced visibly, but he didn't even attempt to argue. He simply couldn't. It was all true. Ethan ran his trembling hands aggressively through his hair in deep agitation. The exact same strong hands that had once lovingly, carefully built a wooden nursery crib were now clenched tightly into fists of absolute, sickening regret. "So, what exactly do we do now?" he pleaded. "We walk in there and we present you as incredibly contrite, highly responsible, and completely focused on being a good, stable father moving forward," Gerald strategized. "We fully acknowledge your past mistakes without continuing to dwell on them defensively. We strongly emphasize your absolute commitment to co-parenting effectively despite the marriage's unfortunate end. You are absolutely not going into this meeting to desperately try to reclaim a broken marriage," Gerald added firmly, locking eyes with Ethan. "You're going in there strictly to legally protect whatever tiny, fractured relationship you can still possibly salvage with your infant child." "But I really don't want the marriage to end," Ethan insisted, his voice rising in panic. "I made a terrible, stupid mistake. I want another chance to fix it." His voice cracked again, this time not from sheer panic over his lost lifestyle, but from genuine, agonizing remorse. It was raw and heavy. Gerald's wrinkled expression was somewhat sympathetic, but remained incredibly firm. "Ethan, you need to wake up and aggressively accept your new reality. Jenna has already officially filed the paperwork for a divorce. Given the extreme, public nature of what has transpired between you two, any chance of a romantic reconciliation is extremely, statistically unlikely. Our absolute sole focus right now is entirely on securing legally reasonable visitation arrangements and ensuring you get fair, survivable financial terms." He paused significantly before adding a dire warning. "And exactly how you emotionally handle this initial stage right now will directly determine exactly how much you ultimately lose in the end." Ethan slumped back heavily into his chair, the crushing, absolute finality of the dire situation finally truly sinking into his thick skull. The massive weight of pure consequence pressed down on his chest much harder than any courtroom judge's gavel ever could. "I haven't even been allowed to meet my own daughter yet," he said quietly. His voice barely rose above a broken whisper, sounding exactly like the thought alone had completely drained the very last remaining drops of his emotional resolve. "That specific issue is exactly something we will actively address at the preliminary meeting next week," Gerald assured him professionally. "A biological father absolutely has legal rights to access his child, barring any hard evidence that he presents a direct physical danger. Despite absolutely everything that has happened with the Mistress, there is no legal suggestion that you would actively, physically harm your infant daughter." He looked directly and piercingly at Ethan over his glasses. "But you must remember, having legal rights does not magically erase the consequences of your actions. Keep that firmly in mind." "Of course I would never hurt her," Ethan replied quickly, completely horrified at the mere suggestion of child abuse. Hot tears suddenly prickled painfully at the corners of his tired eyes. He wasn't crying for his lost money or his lost reputation anymore, but for the tiny, beautiful daughter he had never even been allowed to hold. "Then we will aggressively push to secure official visitation rights," Gerald said, typing notes into his computer. "They will very likely have to be fully supervised visits at first, given the mother's extreme hostility, but hopefully, if you behave, progressing quickly to much more standard, unsupervised arrangements." Gerald smoothly closed his thick legal file, signaling the meeting was done. But for Ethan, the terrifying, agonizing reckoning of his life had truly only just begun. "As you consistently demonstrate highly responsible parenting," Gerald consulted his final notes before standing. "Now, regarding the financial aspect, you are currently entirely unemployed, is that correct?" Ethan nodded glumly, staring at the floor. "Yes, I have some interviews lined up, but every firm in my sector is incredibly hesitant to hire me right now because of the viral negative publicity. That certainly heavily complicates the temporary support calculations," Gerald mused, rubbing his chin. We will absolutely need to strongly argue to the judge that any temporary financial support order should be realistically based on your current, drastically reduced earning capacity in the current market circumstances, not your previous, massive senior partner salary. I will happily pay absolutely whatever I need to for Sophia's care, Ethan said quickly, desperate to show some redeeming quality. I do not want Jenna to ever think I am trying to cheap out or shirk my financial responsibilities as a father. Gerald actively noted this statement with a look of mild approval. That is exactly the right attitude to have right now. We will aim for temporary arrangements that are completely fair to all parties while you take the time to rebuild your destroyed career. As Ethan finally left his attorney's office and walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight, his cell phone buzzed loudly in his pocket. It was a new text message from his mother. Your father and I would very much like to formally meet our new granddaughter. Has there been any progress on getting access to her? Ethan let out a heavy, defeated sigh as he slowly typed his pathetic response. Working on it. Meeting with the lawyers next week. The absolute, crushing truth was that Ethan had truly never felt more pathetically powerless in his entire adult life. His basic ability to access his own biological child was currently entirely dependent on tense, highly hostile legal negotiations. His once promising professional future was completely uncertain and in ruins. Even his own parents' relationship with their only granddaughter actively hinged on his pathetic ability to properly navigate the massive, destructive consequences of his incredibly selfish actions. For the very first time, Ethan was finally beginning to truly understand that some terrible mistakes simply couldn't be fixed with a charming smile, throwing money at the problem, or offering empty promises to do better. Some massive, profound betrayals permanently and violently altered the fundamental landscape of trust and respect in a way that absolutely no simple apology could ever hope to restore. As he walked slowly and painfully toward his car, Ethan happened to walk past a young, happy couple pushing an expensive stroller down the sidewalk. The proud father's arm was wrapped protectively and lovingly around his smiling wife's shoulders. The incredibly simple, beautiful family scene, a scene he had once arrogantly taken completely for granted as inevitable in his own future, now suddenly seemed like an impossible, unreachable dream. The massive, suffocating weight of exactly what he had permanently lost, entirely through his own selfish choices, settled permanently over him like a heavy, physical burden that he would carry for the rest of his life. Exactly 1 week later, the highly anticipated preliminary legal meeting commenced. The sprawling, luxurious law offices of Winters and Associates occupied the entire 15th floor of a massive, gleaming downtown high-rise building, boasting sweeping, panoramic views of the entire city skyline. In a soundproof conference room located at the far east end of the floor, the two heavyweights, Diana Winters and Gerald Hoffman, sat directly across a large mahogany table from each other, entirely surrounded by thick stacks of legal pads, printed emails, and complex financial documents. Their highly anxious clients waited nervously in completely separate rooms down the hall. Jenna sat comfortably in Diana's private corner office with the fiercely loyal Lena sitting right beside her, keeping her distracted and company. Ethan sat completely alone and miserable in a much smaller, windowless conference room, accompanied only by his silent, highly disappointed father, who had insisted on coming to ensure his son didn't mess anything else up. Let us begin with the absolute most pressing, immediate matters, Diana suggested smoothly, her tone entirely businesslike and devoid of emotion. We need to officially hammer out the temporary custody and financial support agreements while the lengthy divorce process officially proceeds. Gerald nodded his head in agreement, opening his file. My client is officially requesting standard, regular visitation schedules with his infant daughter. He reasonably proposes starting initially with supervised visits, rapidly progressing to unsupervised, full-day visits as deemed appropriate by the court. Diana casually consulted her meticulously organized notes. My client, Jenna, is entirely amenable to strictly supervised visitation exactly twice weekly for a maximum of 2 hours per visit. These visits are strictly to take place at Jenna's private home, with her sister, Lena, acting completely as the required, present supervisor. That is quite incredibly restrictive for a biological father, Gerald observed, frowning deeply. Ethan is Sophia's legal father. There has been absolutely no allegation made that he would ever physically harm the child in his care. There is, however, massive, incredibly significant, publicly documented evidence that he actively exercised severely poor, dangerous judgment. Judgment that directly endangered the physical lives of both the mother and the unborn child on the night of the birth. Diana countered smoothly, her voice like a velvet hammer. Jenna's absolute priority right now is establishing a calm, stress-free, stable routine for a premature newborn who has already experienced significant medical challenges. Frankly, Mr. Caldwell has yet to demonstrate any commitment to Sophia's well-being. Gerald frowned harder. How on earth can he possibly demonstrate his commitment to his daughter if he is barely legally allowed to see his own child for 4 hours a week? He can easily demonstrate his commitment by humbly accepting these initially conservative, protective arrangements without a massive fight and steadily building trust from there, Diana replied flawlessly. This is strictly a temporary, interim agreement to maintain the peace while the divorce officially proceeds. It is absolutely not the final custody determination. If your client can successfully demonstrate reliability, punctuality, and good judgment during these supervised visits, we can absolutely revisit and possibly expand the terms in 60 days. Gerald, knowing he had very little leverage due to the video, made a quiet note on his pad. I will discuss the terms with my client. He quickly moved on to the next highly contentious issue. We also need to officially address the issue of temporary financial support. We need to legally acknowledge Mr. Caldwell's current, highly unfortunate employment situation. Indeed we do, Diana acknowledged with a shark-like smile. While Mr. Caldwell's own reckless actions directly resulted in his embarrassing termination from his firm, my client practically recognizes that it is ultimately in little Sophia's best interest for her father to quickly rebuild his lucrative career. Therefore, we generously propose a temporary, interim support order based strictly on 75% of his previous, massive corporate salary for a grace period of exactly 3 months. After that period, we would aggressively reassess the amount based on his actual employment status and earnings at that time. Gerald actually raised his bushy eyebrows in genuine surprise. That is significantly more reasonable than I honestly expected you to be today. Diana's resulting smile was razor-thin and incredibly sharp. Miss Caldwell is entirely focused on long-term, financial stability for her child. Absolutely not on petty, short-term financial punishment. She pragmatically recognizes that her daughter ultimately benefits from having a financially secure, working father. The intense, rapid-fire negotiations continued between the two lawyers for nearly 2 full hours. They meticulously covered absolutely every single detail of the separation. Ethan's highly restricted access to the family home. He would only be allowed to retrieve his remaining personal items by strict appointment only. Important medical decisions for baby Sophia. They would tentatively share joint legal custody. But Jenna would entirely retain absolute tie-breaking authority in the event of a disagreement, and the complex, interim financial arrangements covering all household expenses and medical bills during the formal separation period. Finally, Diana efficiently gathered up her thick stack of papers and tapped them neatly on the desk. I believe we have successfully reached a preliminary, highly agreeable settlement on all essential, immediate matters. I will formally draft the temporary arrangement documents for your review this afternoon. Pending our respective clients' final approval and signatures, we can quickly proceed with the formal divorce filings early next month. Agreed, Gerald concluded, closing his heavy briefcase. My client still foolishly hopes for a romantic reconciliation, he added with a weary sigh. But he understands that we absolutely need to establish these strict, Temporary arrangements regardless of his pipe dreams. His tone was completely calm, but the desperate hope in his words sounded significantly less like professional confidence and much more like a tired man simply reciting a required line he no longer actually believed. Diana's carefully guarded expression revealed absolutely nothing, though she severely doubted that Jenna had even a microscopic fraction of interest in any sort of reconciliation. Diana had seen this exact, pathetic dynamic play out 100 times before. The cheating husband always desperately hoped the slow, grinding legal process might magically be slow enough to somehow turn back the hands of time and erase the betrayal. It never ever was. "I will politely convey his desperate hopes to my client," Diana said dryly. "In the meantime, shall we finally go inform them of our significant progress?" Down the quiet hallway, in Diana's massive private office, Jenna sat incredibly stiffly on the expensive leather sofa. She was desperately trying her best to focus entirely on baby Sophia, who was currently sleeping soundly in her carrier, rather than fully focusing on the terrifying, churning anxiety twisting violently in her stomach. The tiny baby's slow, peaceful, rhythmic breaths were truly the absolute only thing keeping Jenna grounded to the earth right now, fully knowing that massive, life-altering legal documents were actively shaping her entire new life behind those closed doors. Lena sat beside her, casually scrolling through her phone, occasionally sharing completely irrelevant social media updates just to purposely distract her anxious sister from the silence. "Oh wow. Apparently, Vanessa has officially closed down all her social media accounts," Lena reported, her voice heavily tinged with dark satisfaction, though she didn't actually smile. "That is probably a very smart move considering the massive amount of death threats she was receiving." Jenna winced slightly, adjusting the baby's blanket. "I absolutely do not condone the internet mob doing that. As much as I deeply, fiercely hate what she did to me, threatening physical violence against her isn't the right answer." Her words were spoken softly, but incredibly firmly. It was a beautiful, quiet reminder that a woman's fundamental dignity and moral compass absolutely did not have to disappear completely just because her trust had been violently broken. "You are a much better, kinder person than I am," Lena muttered under her breath. "Personally, I would be perfectly fine with her actually experiencing some real, terrifying consequences for her actions." She didn't look up from her glowing phone screen, but her jaw was visibly, tightly clenched. Lena's fierce sisterly loyalty always burned so much hotter than her anger. She lost her entire career and was forced to move back home in disgrace with her parents, Jenna logically pointed out. "Those are massive consequences. Besides, Ethan is the one who actively stood at an altar and made vows to me, not Vanessa." There was absolutely no bitter venom in Jenna's calm tone, only pure, unadulterated clarity. The profound betrayal that always hurt the absolute most always came directly from those closest to you. The heavy office door finally clicked open, and Diana entered the room with a highly satisfied, victorious expression that immediately, significantly eased some of Jenna's suffocating tension. The visible, physical shift in Diana's confident posture, her usually tight shoulders relaxed, her chin slightly lifted in triumph, was the absolute first real, tangible signal that something significant had finally gone completely in their favor. "We have successfully reached preliminary legally binding agreements on absolutely all key points," Diana proudly announced, taking a seat behind her desk. "Mr. Hoffman is currently next door aggressively discussing the strict terms with Ethan. But I firmly believe the terms we secured today are quite incredibly favorable to your long-term goals." She immediately proceeded to meticulously outline the highly restricted, supervised visitation schedule, the generous financial support arrangements, the house details, and every other complex legal point they had successfully negotiated. To Jenna, every single bullet point Diana read aloud felt significantly less like boring legal ease and much more like massive pieces of reclaimed, conquered territory. These were the foundational pieces of Jenna's brand new future being firmly, legally defined entirely by her own terms. Jenna listened incredibly carefully to every word, nodding slowly as each complex point was explained. There would be absolutely no more silence. There would be absolutely no more waiting in fear. Every single typed line in that legal agreement was a small, hard one, incredibly beautiful act of pure survival. So, dear friend, as we reflect on this incredible journey, we are reminded that sometimes a beautiful life absolutely does not shatter all at once in one loud, devastating moment. Sometimes it unravels incredibly quietly, slowly, thread by thread, lie by lie, until one day you suddenly find yourself sitting across a large mahogany desk from a ruthless lawyer, aggressively negotiating the strict terms of a brand new life you absolutely never, ever imagined you would have to rebuild from scratch. Jenna did not actively choose the horrific betrayal that befell her. She absolutely did not ask to become a famous viral symbol for wronged women everywhere, or to be violently, unfairly forced into a desperate survival mode on the night of her birthday. But when the terrifying, catastrophic moment actually came knocking at her door, she did exactly what the great Stoic philosophers have long taught us all to do. She bravely faced the ugly, painful truth, not with blinding, destructive rage, but with cold, calculated reason. She did not desperately try to control the past or fix what was already permanently, irreparably broken by her husband's actions. Instead, she fiercely focused all her remaining energy on exactly what she could still actively control: her unshakable dignity, her innocent child's absolute safety, and her bright, reclaimed future. The great Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius once wisely said, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." Jenna beautifully and powerfully revoked the toxic power of her husband's profound betrayal to completely define her life story. She rewrote the ending. And if you are currently struggling in your own life, maybe you absolutely can too. We do not always get perfect, poetic justice in the exact way we expect or demand it, but we always get the incredible chance to choose exactly how we respond to the fire. We get the beautiful chance to stand up tall, not just in blind anger, but in quiet, unbreakable strength. You can rebuild your life, one boundary at a time, one deep breath at a time, one legal document at a time. This incredible story is absolutely not just about a messy divorce or viral internet drama. It is a profound story about fiercely reclaiming your own powerful voice when the cruel world desperately tries to silence it. So if you are currently walking through the flames of your very own fire, please remember this truth. True healing absolutely does not mean magically forgetting the pain that was inflicted upon you. It simply means stubbornly refusing to let that profound pain become your entire identity. You have absolutely got this. And if you genuinely do not feel like you have the strength today, simply come back again tomorrow. We will always be right here waiting for you. Keep walking bravely forward, step by step, even when it hurts to move. If this deeply emotional story moved your heart, helped you mentally reflect on your own life, or strongly reminded you of someone who desperately needs to hear this empowering message right now, please hit that like button on this video. Share it immediately with a close friend who needs a reminder of their own strength. And absolutely do not forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell for more incredible, inspiring stories that speak directly to the unbreakable strength inside you. We are building an amazing community here, and we would love for you to be a part of it. We will always get through this together. See you in the next video.